as far as what I actually saw on the practice field, the first padded practice of training camp, most of the 11-on-11 work was from inside the 20-yard line. They started off at the 10, and then they went back to the 20 eventually. And Stefon Diggs looks like he's going to be quite the red zone threat. The very first play that they ran from the 10-yard line, which was blown dead by a false start. Blake Fisher on the other side, I believe, at left tackle, because Laramie Tunsil's not out there yet. But Diggs had an awesome comeback towards the front corner of the end zone, made a great catch on the sideline. A little bit later, Stroud threw a ball to the back corner of the end zone, and I don't think Diggs got his feet down, but he did come down with the football. And I think there was another catch by Diggs that ultimately was a touchdown. He's very good at getting open in that quick space, and even though he's not the biggest guy out there, okay, maybe Stroud's going to be looking for Stefon Diggs in the red zone. So if you're thinking about fantasy football options and you want to read way too much into one practice and full pads the first of the year, maybe Stefon Diggs is going to get a lot of touchdowns this season.
I'd say for the Texans that Stefon Diggs and Tank Dell will lead the team in red zone touchdowns this year.
Interesting.
Between the two of them.
Tank Dell.
CJ found them all the time in the end zone last year. They seem to have a really comfortable, especially when like a play would break down, they would know how to find each other. We saw obviously the big drive against Arizona, where CJ finds Tank Dell to win the game, the Tampa Bay game as well. In the red zone, like I think I'm gonna bet on Diggs and Tank being the two guys with the most touchdowns of that two, Schultz and Nico.
I'll be honest. I hope that Schultz is getting it more, because I just don't really want to see Tank Dell in the red zone that much, given what happened last time.
Just don't block. Just don't block.
It's crowded out there.
Just
put crowded.
Put him on the outside.
Well, if you're on the outside, you're eventually going to have to come towards the middle of the field, or you're just closer to everybody. You don't get to use all that space. So I don't know, but whatever the case, Stroud and Diggs, there's clearly a connection already. They have their own handshake. They're talking to each other after plays. I asked Titus Howard about his first impressions of Stefon Diggs, and Howard clearly believes that whatever narratives about Stefon Diggs were on the outside, he thinks they're BS. He thinks he's a good guy. As Stefon Diggs said, I'm a great guy. It's early, so they're in the honeymoon phase, but everyone has described Diggs as a leader to this point and somebody who they have enjoyed hanging out with. And for what it's worth, totally different than what we heard about him in Buffalo and in Minnesota, and hopefully it stays that way.
Stefon Diggs, whether it's through the media or through his teammates, has done a really good job of kind of killing those narratives. Like just the way he presents himself when he's talking to the media, the way he is on the field, looking like he's having more fun than anyone at practice. What you're hearing from his former teammates as well. I know, Cole Beasley was on Landry Locker's podcast a couple weeks ago and was saying how he thought all the narratives were just garbage about Stefon Diggs and how he is a good teammate and a hardworking guy. So wide receivers just get put in this diva thing, and then
he has been a diva before,
for sure.
You can't deny it.
But when it seems, but things aren't. He's not going to be here long enough, probably for it to go sour. That's one of the benefits of what they've done with this contract. If he's only here for a year, I can't imagine what we saw with Josh Allen and the end of his run with Kirk Cousins. That's going to happen with Stefon Diggs. I just don't see it.
The defensive side of things, Kamari Lassiter had a nice play yesterday in coverage on Stefon Diggs. There were some things written about him afterwards, and a lot of questions were asked about Lassiter afterwards. Something to keep in mind, it was a nice play. I did see that. It is very hard for those who are there covering practice to see the defensive backfield. It just is. Generally, the players keep lining up in the line of sight between us and the actual defensive backs. So take everything with a grain of salt as far as like astute observations of what things are seen. Like basically we all have to come together and kind of talk with each other to just definitively know everything that might have happened on a play, because it's very hard to see the numbers. But whatever the case, Lassiter had a nice play yesterday, and there were a lot of compliments about Kamari Lassiter yesterday. So we actually heard from Kamari Lassiter. We also heard from Jalen Petrie, and both of them mentioned that Azeez Al-Shaair is the de facto leader of that defense, the new linebacker that they got from the Titans. Jalen Petrie mentioned a story similar to Will Anderson, where I guess he did something wrong, and Al-Shaair got on him right away.
Interesting.
And I even asked Kamari Lassiter, has that happened to you yet? Have you had, I said it in this way, have you experienced Al-Shaair's leadership? And Lassiter was like, I think I know what you're talking about there. Pause for a moment. No, that hasn't happened yet. But hey, when someone's getting after us in a harsh way, like you realize it's not out of anger about you, it's about doing your job.
Yeah.
So Alshire is clearly settling into that role as a leader on defense.
Well, that's interesting because it clearly was like one of their top targets. I mean, D'Amico's coached him before, so bringing him in, he's probably going to be calling. I'm guessing he's going to wear the green dot on defense. Just a guess from because last year Toto wore it the first game of the season. I think it was.
I don't even know who wore it at the end of the year.
Yeah, I don't know
I
who
would
it had
assume
at the
Denzel
end,
Perriman was doing it for a bit, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But Alshire is, I think, going to be the most impactful addition on a defense that added 28 sacks and Daniil Hunter and Danico Autry. The pass rush is going to be better, but they needed somebody, I think, to just have them be smarter.
Good.
And they didn't have that last year. Last observation from Texans training camp, which I was out earlier this morning. Nico Collins and John Mechie had scheduled days off. Christian Harris still not back. He's dealing with an injury, soft tissue injury, I believe, with a groin. And Joe Mixon also not back at practice. Yesterday, D'Amico Ryan said, though, that's fine.
All right, well, we'll wait and see. Hopefully, Joe Mixon's not out too long. I'd like to see him out there at some point. But
I would too, but again, all the reps that Damian Pierce can get, or
That's
these
good.
other running backs, Jawar Jordan. I'm much more in favor of the young running backs getting work now than Joe Mixon.
Yeah, training camp's always a weird time too because you just don't know how safe these teams are being.
Yeah, Damian Pierce got taken to the ground, and that actually was a moment where everyone was like, "Oh,
yeah,
what's going on?"
Would Christian Harris be playing if this was week 1 of the NFL season? It's those things are hard to know at this point in training camp because they're just always precautious. So, those are always important things to keep an eye on, especially with this team. With what happened last year, they got beat up pretty badly by the injury bug in 2023. So you hope that this year is much better.